no one told me about it. How people cry. Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. How would I know? Why should I care? There's no bother trying to find him. He's not there. Well, let me tell you about the way he looks, the way he acts, and the color of his hair. His voice is soft and good, his eyes are clear and bright, but he's not there.
Well, welcome to my new channel. This is Dave Tubman. I'm the author of the book Jimmy Hoffa is Missing the Gap. And this channel is using the same initials, JHIM-TG on Facebook, and also JHIM-TG on YouTube and other social media sites. I'm just trying to get the story out. I'm not interested in selling a bunch of books. As a matter of fact, if you go to this Facebook link that I show at the bottom of the screen, you can download the book off of Internet Archive. And what's neat about that is you can go page by page, and I encourage you to read the whole book before you dig into it. And then you can also, on the left side of the screen, not the one on top, there's a magnifying glass where you can do a word search or date search, and it'll take you right to that section of the book that talks about that topic or that person. So I'm encouraging you all to, first of all, like and share and subscribe to this channel. And if you want to know when it's going to be broadcasting next, I don't have a regular schedule yet. This is the first one, July 1st, 2022. And I'll be announcing and putting links on there. I'll be announcing when the next segment's going to be, what's going to be about. I plan on doing several of them during this month. July, it seems like everybody comes out of the woodwork. But this is, it's not really to compete with everybody's rumors, but to distinguish itself from rumor. It's eyewitness news. And this is historical accurate. It's not made up. There's no reason for my parents to have made up this story. They weren't after financial gain of any kind, and even in the book, I wasn't. I gave away more copies than I have sold. I just thought this is the most convenient way to get the story out so the general public gets to hear it. I'll tell you the number of people that have heard it are quite a few, all the way from the FBI back in 2006. I convinced my mom to go ahead and tell them the story finally. My dad had made her promise not to tell anybody about it because he was afraid of reprisal. I won't go into details. It's covered in the book. We'll get to it. What I plan to do is to go through the book with you. So go ahead and download the book after you watch this episode tonight and read it. It takes a couple hours, maybe 3 at the most. Don't try to dig into it at first. If you can do it in one sitting, that's great, because it does continue on. It's chronological, goes by date, and like I said, the first couple of chapters are really a kind of a backstory of who my parents were. Then it gets into the actual things that they observed the afternoon Hoffa disappeared. By the time you're done with the book, I'm going to present a whole bunch of research, and I believe you'll agree with me that we know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa that afternoon. I'm going to read some notes here so I don't miss any of the dates or details, but this is just a background on who Jimmy Hoffa was in case you weren't alive at the time. You may have heard stories, but this does distinguish between some of the misinformation that's been put out. Even some of the experts have a little bit of, skewed information that they've bought into. This story's been given to, I'll go down the list, it's been given to the FBI, like I said, in 2006. 2009, I called and talked to Barbara Ann Crancer, who was Hoffa's daughter. My mom passed in 2011, and I thought, what do I do with this story now? So I just started digging into research, and I researched everywhere. I'm not going to tell you the details at this point, but it wasn't until 2019 that the story kind of came alive again, and I thought, hey, I ran across some people I thought was sincere of finding out the truth about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa that afternoon. The first one was Eric Shawn from Fox Nation. So I called him. He thought, that's fantastic. He said, I hadn't heard that story. I said, of course you haven't. And so I told him the story. He wanted to actually do an interview and put it on Fox Nation. He had just gotten through. I saw his riddle series when they were digging up, or not digging up, yeah, digging up floorboards at the Beaverland House, Northwest Detroit, and came up kind of empty-handed. It was inconclusive with the blood and the DNA testing that was done, but they did determine that it wasn't conclusive. It wasn't Hoffa's, basically. And that's what the whole movie The Irishman was about. Later in 2019, Eric Shawn, like I said, wanted to do an interview, and a family member said they were afraid there would be some sort of backlash, so they convinced me to cancel that interview, so we never did it. But later in the year, there was, I decided, since I canceled the interview, that I told Barbara Ann Crancer, and I got a hold of James P. Hoffa Jr. Called twice. The second time I said, I won't bother you again. If you want to hear the story, call me back. Sure enough, I heard back from James Hoffa Jr. I told him the story. We chatted for a bit. Very cordial. Felt a little funny when I started talking about what I thought happened. But his dad and my dad were the same age. James Hoffa Sr. was 62 at the time. My dad was 62 at the time. My dad was born in 1912. James Hoffa Sr. was born in 1913. But they were cut from the same cloth as far as their generations. They went through hardship after hardship, seems like every 10 years, from the Spanish flu, I think that was 1918. Then you had the Roaring Twenties, you had the World War I and the Depression of the 30s. You had World War II in the 40s. You had 1950s was the Korean War. Civil rights stuff flared up in the 50s and 1960s, obviously. So they both experienced a lot of the same hardships, and they were survivors. They learned how to get along in life. Workaholics, both of them. My dad was an alcoholic too, but that was tied into his work. He was a restaurant and hotel manager his whole life. And so that was his way of coping with working 12, 14-hour days. I saw him on Mondays, his only day off when we moved to Detroit. I'm just going to give you a background, first of all, of Hoffa. And as we go through the book, I'm going to talk about the witnesses. I'm going to talk about all the sources that I came across, including the Hoffa report, the vault. I'm going to talk about some Freedom of Information Act transcripts and files that I requested and received. I'm going to link you to my mom's video where she tells in her own words on camera the story of what she saw. It was 2006, so she was 89 at the time, but when she got on the subject, even though she was on blood pressure medicine and everything, you can tell she dug this out of her memory like it was just etched. So you'll be able to see that. It's about 16 minutes long. Everything's linked on this Facebook site, though, so if there's anything that you're a little confused about where to get the information, go to this Facebook site. Sign up and follow that as well. That's where I'm going to post when the next segment's going to be broadcast. I'll probably have some live segments and invite callers or questions. You can email or text me any questions you have after this episode. So anyway, so February 14th, Valentine's Day of 1913 is when Hoffa was born in Brazil, Indiana. And when he was 7 years old, his father died. He was a coal miner, and he was overcome with a lung disease from the coal residue. And so he was basically fatherless from a pretty young age. Not long after that, and that was 1920, he moved, his dad died. Then in 1924, the family moved to Detroit. He had 3 siblings. Matter of fact, his brother William was also involved in the unions. So you don't hear much about him. I haven't really followed up. Let's see. Then he, when he got to Detroit, he quit school. He got a job at Kroger's on the warehouse loading docks. Now, he was pretty young at the time. He organized the first strike where he got his co-workers together, and they refused to unload the strawberries. They were called the Strawberry Boys because that was their main job, unloading produce, fruit and stuff. And at that time, I think the wages were like 30 cents an hour, pretty meager. And they would be forced to work 12 hours, 14-hour days. And they were required by Kroger's to spend 30% of their pay in groceries at Kroger's. So you can, and they didn't get breaks. This was a time when labor was really exploited by managers and the bosses. So he was successful though when he challenged Kroger and formed his first. He had a knack for negotiating. At the time now, violence really became kind of a necessity for people. Managers would use thugs, mob guys to beat up the workers if they protested or struck, their jobs. And then Hoffa did the same thing. He went to the mobs and got his own thugs to beat up their thugs, and so that's where he got kind of indoctrinated into this violence in making things happen. And it was considered just the way that you had to resort to. So in 1936, he was organizing a strike, and he met his wife Josephine. Her maiden name was Poziwak, and they had two kids, James Hoffa Jr., James P. Hoffa is his name, and then also Barbara Ann Hoffa, which later became Barbara Ann Crancer. She married Robert Crancer. Now, Hoffa Jr. eventually became in 1999, he became the president of Teamsters. And he did end up kicking the mob out of the unions. And then Barbara Ann Crancer went into law. She actually became a judge, worked for Attorney General's office in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a little more background, but I'm going to focus more on the gap, which is the focus of the book on the gap is because there was a 90-minute time frame where the main suspect was Chucky O'Brien, as most people know, driving that Mercury that you see on the book cover. And Hoffa sat in the back seat, which was really roomy. It was a good-sized car, which is why I think they needed that car. They had 4 big men in it, including Hoffa, Chucky O'Brien, and the other 2 suspected passengers were Vito Giacalone, who the day of the abduction he had evaded his tail, the FBI tail. They didn't know where he was all day. But it's presumed he may have been one of the passengers in the car along with Hoffa and O'Brien. And then also Sal Bergoglio, Sally Bugs. And he was a New Jersey contact or assistant for Tony Provenzano from New Jersey. So he was kind of a natural person that might be in the car. Hoffa wouldn't have, had any anticipation about him being in the car. And of course, not Vito. He dealt with Vito all the time. And Chucky O'Brien. Now, people say, oh, it wasn't Chucky. They wouldn't trust him to drive the car and being involved in this. But even Jack Goldsmith, and he is Chucky O'Brien's stepson. And he wrote a book called In Hoffa's Shadow about Chucky's involvement with the mafia and the unions and Hoffa. He wrote that in September 2019. Unfortunately, it released at the exact same time that The Irishman came out. And he was pretty upset that The Irishman portrayed Chucky O'Brien as the driver of the Mercury. Because in his book, towards the end, he proclaims that Chucky O'Brien wasn't trusted and that Louis Lintow got a call at 3:30 and therefore Hoffa could not have been in the car. And when I talked to him and gave him my parents' story, he said, well, that's impossible. Did you read my book? I said, sure I did. Well, so back to the history of Hoffa. Chucky O'Brien himself lost his father when he was quite young. There are conflicting stories of how old he was and how he lost his father. But one was that he was picketing and he was shot in the picket line. I'm not really certain on that, so I'm not going to try and give you my opinion on that, but he was quite young. So James Hoffa took him under his wing, treated him like his own son, and people weren't aware really that he never was officially his foster son or his adopted son. As a matter of fact, Hoffa kept the adoption papers unsigned in his top desk drawer at home. And that really irked O'Brien in later years because he never fulfilled, the commitment of adopting Chucky O'Brien as his son. So let's see. Back to Hoffa. So he met Josephine in 1936. They married, had 2 kids. 1957, 1958, in Miami, Florida, was the Teamsters Union Convention, and it was about the upcoming president of the Teamsters campaign. And it was spread out all over Miami, the Sunset Strip. So happens this is the first of at least 3 times that I know of, that my dad's life overlapped Jimmy Hoffa's. They weren't close friends. I don't know they ever met, but my dad was made well aware of the union, who Jimmy Hoffa was, and O'Brien back in that time. But what it was the convention was up and down the Sunset Strip. We had moved from Washington, D.C., where my dad was managing a hotel pretty close to the White House. And he got a better job in Miami managing the Balmoral. And the Balmoral was a tall hotel, pretty popular at the time, and it was also part of 3 that were owned by the same owners, and the Balmoral, the Kenilworth, and the Fontainebleau. A lot of people heard of the Fontainebleau and may not have heard of the Balmoral. They're apartments now, actually. But all on Sunset Strip, along with all the hotels that were catering to this convention. It was a really big convention. So we lived in Miami from 1957, maybe even part of 56, till the last part of 58, maybe even into 59. The short story on that is Jimmy Hoffa was the vice president to the president, Dave Beck, and he was kind of feeding the feds information under the table, so that Dave Beck ended up getting arrested, sent to prison, which opened up the spot for presidency for Jimmy Hoffa. He was elected. He was charged also because he was charged with some things by the McClellan Commission, which was spearheaded by Robert Kennedy. And then John Kennedy, the senator, was kind of brought in to help manage that commission against organized crime, which eventually became the Get Hoffa Squad. So Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy grilled Jimmy Hoffa in court proceedings and the commission, and but he was acquitted originally. So that left him open to become president of the Teamsters. He began in 1957, 58, and then he continued until 1971. In 1967, the charges that were brought against Hoffa in Detroit, extortion or misuse of Teamster pension funds, and bribing a witness, a jury member, I believe, came kind of to a head, and he was convicted with 13-year sentence. He ended up serving 5 of those. In 1971, he'd been in prison just about 5 years now. He had to relinquish presidency. He was still president even though he was in prison those 5 years of the Teamsters, Local 299, and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. So he handpicked Frank Fitzsimmons to take over, hold his place as president. He trusted him enough to hold it and not screw things up, so that he could also step back in when he got out of prison. Because, like I said, Nixon was president, the Teamsters and the unions all helped him get elected, so he was kind of beholden to him. And the 76 re-election was coming up at the same time as the union election, and so he wanted that support again. So he was trying to appease the union's requests. O'Brien and Fitzsimmons were lobbying Nixon, and they got him to agree to pardon Hoffa in 1971, and with the stipulation, and Frank Fitzsimmons suggested this, that he not participate in union activities like running for president until 1980. That left it clear for Frank Fitzsimmons to continue as president in the 76 election. And Frank was getting used to the job and kind of liked having that power. The Mafia liked Frank Fitzsimmons over Hoffa because he was more free with his doling out the cash for the projects and casinos in Las Vegas. Hoffa was a little more discriminatory, and he did fund a lot of the casino projects, but he would pick and choose, and Mafia preferred, I would say, Frank Fitzsimmons over Hoffa at this time. So Fitzsimmons and Hoffa were actually enemies at the time in 1975. Hoffa was let out Christmas Eve in 1971, and right away the restaurant union members put together a welcome home or coming out party, I don't know what you call it, welcome home party at Carl's Chop House, and that was pretty close to when he got out, almost right away. A week later, there was another one held by friends of Jimmy Hoffa, close friends and family, at the Raleigh House. And there's a picture of Hoffa and his wife Josephine taken at the Raleigh House. And of course, there's pictures and videos at Carl's Chop House when that was happening. So, ironically, according to the Detroit Historical.org site, and of course elsewhere, so Hoffa was abducted on July 30th at around 2:45 from the Marcus Red Fox and never seen again. There were 6 eyewitnesses, and they saw him come into the restaurant. When he was stood up at 2 p.m., he was supposed to meet with Tony Giacalone, of course, the Detroit Mafia boss, and also Tony Provenzano, who was a pretty high union official in New Jersey. But they became enemies in prison because Hoffa rejected his request to receive money while he was in prison, and something to do with his retirement too, but that ticked off Provenzano. They had a fist fight in Lewisburg Penitentiary. And Hoffa was getting paid. Of course, he was acting president while he was incarcerated. So that was a long-lasting feud, those few years since he got out. And so Tony Provenzano would not have supported him running for president again. Now, the week of this meeting at the Red Fox, there were 2 simultaneous meetings that happened on the same day. It was July 26th, 4 days before Hoffa disappeared. One was held at Larco's in Detroit, and it was a pizzeria, Italian restaurant type restaurant downtown by the stadium. And the meeting was held with Vitali and Quasarano, who were co-owners, mobsters they co-owned Central Sanitation, which was a waste site facility in Hamtramck, Michigan, downtown Detroit. And so that happened. Frank Fitzsimmons flew in to Detroit from New York just for that purpose. He was there for 24 hours overnight. The man who checked him in testified he checked him in at 1 o'clock in the morning on July 26th at the Fairlane in Dearborn Hotel, and that he left on the 27th, checked out the following day. He was provided keys to either a Lincoln or a Mercury. He doesn't remember. Now that year, the Lincoln and Mercury were almost identical, the body style. Could very well be it was this Mercury that was driven the same day Hoffa was abducted. Who knows? So he testified he was there. Mike Larco, the owner of Larco's, and of course Fitzsimmons denied that there was a meeting, but the FBI was pretty certain that it took place. And of course the desk clerk testifying about Fitzsimmons coming in exclusively for this meeting also tied in. That same day, on the 26th, Tony and Vito Giacalone go visit Jimmy Hoffa. They said, we're going to arrange a meeting with Tony Provenzano so you can patch things up and he'll back you for running for president this year. They were all expecting, everybody figured that his appeals about the restriction not being able to run again until 1980 would be lifted by the government. And so Frank Fitzsimmons had his deal with the feds that he wouldn't allow Hoffa to become president. In exchange, they would go light on his son Richard Fitzsimmons, make sure he doesn't have any activities in the union, and basically not allow Hoffa to become president again. So Hoffa, though, had his own deal with the feds, saying, well, if you release me from this 1980 restriction, I'll boot the mafia out of the union and give you information so that you can make sure they don't get involved with the union activities again. So it was they were working both sides of the coin. So Tony Giacalone and Vito Giacalone go to see Hoffa at his Lake Orion cottage. They helped him change out a carpet in a guest room, and they set up this meeting for to meet with Tony Provenzano. Tony Giacalone was going to be there, and also Lenny Schultz. Now Lenny Schultz was kind of a moderator. He would be there just to kind of buffer the two sides in case of disagreements. He would act as a go-between, and so that was important that Lenny Schultz would be there. Then I'll tell you other details about these people I'm mentioning, but for right now I'm going to kind of cut to the chase. So the meeting was set up 2 p.m. at the Red Fox for Wednesday, July 30th. Hoffa was anxious about it. Right after Tony Giacalone and Vito left his cottage, who shows up but Louis Linto. Now, Louis Linto owned a limousine service. He used to be an enemy, but he became close friends with the Hoffas and, of course, Jimmy. And on the way to the Red Fox, Jimmy actually stopped by. He left his cottage at 1 on the 30th, Wednesday, and he went by to see Louis Linto, hoping he would go with him to this meeting at 2. And so he ended up showing up, but Linto was conveniently not there. He had gone to lunch in the bank with his business associate, Cynthia Green. So he was gone, but a couple of other employees verified, yeah, Hoffa came. It was about 1:15, 1:20, something like that. And so then he went on to the meeting. He was there in time, of course. He was very punctual. If you were late, he got upset. That was one thing he didn't tolerate. So he goes along to the meeting, shows up at 2 sharp, or just before 2, actually. They don't show up by 2:10, and he gets upset because they haven't shown up yet. And so he goes inside, sees they're inside. Now, he wasn't dressed to actually have a meeting. It was a coat and tie restaurant. You had to have a coat and tie to be seated in the dining room. And he wore a shirt similar to what I'm wearing right now, a blue pullover, sport shirt, nylon, whatever, polyester, and he wore blue slacks. So he wasn't planning on having a meeting at the Red Fox. He knew it was going to be a rendezvous place, and the meeting would be held elsewhere. That was pretty common. So he didn't expect, but he went inside to see maybe they're inside. He was hanging outside. Talked to a waitress and a hostess, and they testified. They witnessed he came in and spoke briefly to them and looked around. The manager of the Red Fox claims he didn't come in, but that wasn't backed up by these other 2 people. They said, yeah, he came in. So then other witnesses saw him talking on the phone. He went behind the Red Fox and talked to him on a payphone that was on a column outside of a Damon hardware store. It was a strip center right behind Raleigh, the Red Fox. I'll get to Raleigh House in a minute. So he called his wife and complained that Tony Jack didn't show up, and there was no Tony Provenzano or Lenny Schultz. So he complained to her, said, I'm leaving. He says, I'll be home by 4 o'clock and cook those steaks I promised I was going to cook today on the barbecue. So 2:15, the FBI got the phone records, and they're verified that he made his call to her at 2:15. Then he followed up with a call to Louis Linto's office, the airport service limousine. And that came in at 2:35. There's discrepancies there. Louis Linto claims that call didn't come in until 3:30. And that's the whole point of Jack Goldsmith's claim that Hoffa couldn't have been in the car, because he called Linto at 3:30, and the car was seen at the Union Hall with Chucky O'Brien at 4 o'clock. That wouldn't have been enough time. So his whole premise at the tail end of his book was this claim that Louis Linto testified before the grand jury, that he got a call from Hoffa at 3:30. So anyway, witnesses then saw Hoffa walk from the phone towards the restaurant front entrance again, and they stopped and talked to him for a few minutes, shook his hands. They recognized him. Anybody in Detroit area probably would have recognized Jimmy Hoffa, and even Chucky O'Brien, because he was always at his side. So they spoke to him a bit. When they talked to the FBI later, they confirmed that they're legitimate, because they spoke about Josephine Hoffa having cataract surgery coming up, and that wasn't public information. The only place they would have heard that was directly from Jimmy Hoffa. So that's been corroborated. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. One witness saw the car pull up and recognized Chucky O'Brien in the Mercury. Another witness saw Hoffa get into the car, the back seat, with 3 other men. Didn't recognize the others, so there was 2 in the back, 2 in front. Then the car starts to pull out, and now the time frame is about 2:40, maybe 2:45. So there's a truck driver delivering some goods to the center, whether it was Raleigh House or one of the other stores, I'm not sure. But this truck driver went on record as having to swerve and stop because his car almost hit him when he was pulling in the side driveway on Telegraph Road. And otherwise he would have hit him. And so he said he recognized Hoffa sitting behind the driver, and it looked like he was having words with the driver, moving his hands, whatever. And he noticed that there was the muzzle of a shotgun between him and the passenger on the other side of the back seat. And it was covered partially by a gray blanket. So that's what his testimony was. It's in the Hoffex report. All these witnesses are listed in the Hoffex report. So he also testified the car then swerved out of the side driveway. The only way you could turn at that point would be south, because it was 4 lanes going south and you couldn't go across to northbound. So he testified the car swerved out, this Mercury, with Hoffa in the back seat, didn't know the other 3 passengers, and turned southbound on Telegraph Road. The car turned southbound on Telegraph Road, but lo and behold, Ken and Francis Tubman had left the townhouse that I was also sharing with them at the time in Bloomfield Township, the same town as the Marcus Red Fox. They were on their way to my sister's house for a 2-night campover, and so they had to be there before 4, they knew, and it was about 1:20, maybe 1:30, depending on traffic, from the townhouse house on Woodward and 15.5 mile to Westland, Grandview, which is West Detroit. Let's see. So Woodward Avenue angled out from Detroit, and Telegraph went straight south. So their fastest route was to cut over 15 mile to Telegraph, and then go directly south to Ford Road, and then turn west again and go to my sister's house in Westland. Right at about the 2:40, 2:45 mark, they're passing by the Red Fox. My mom's the passenger, my dad's driving in the fast lane, the number 4 lane, and my mom catches out of the corner of her eye this Mercury, a burgundy color. She didn't call her Mercury at the time, and this car was swerving. So that's what caught her eye. It was a regular, driving. The car then pulls right up behind them, almost to their bumper. And she, of course, kind of notices it, but she didn't know, what was going on. Then the car pulls up right alongside, within a foot or two, a couple of feet, next lane. And is riding at the same pace, the same speed, right next to my parents and my mom's side of the car. And Chucky O'Brien is recognized by my dad as the driver. He knew from his dealings with Darby's in Detroit and restaurant business and whatever, he knew who the people were. He was a manager and always negotiated against his employees joining the union. He never owned a restaurant, he just managed Darby's, and of course in Miami Beach he managed at Balmoral. So he was fair with his employees. They weren't anxious to join the union, but they would picket and strike, other union members, trying to get them to sign up. So anyway, my dad knew who he was. My mom didn't. But as soon as my dad said, "That's Chucky O'Brien, it's the mafia," my mom, that made her look even more intent. The year before, 1974, is when The Godfather came out. And so everybody was keen on who the mafia was, not just Detroit. But he knew who he was. He did recognize the type of car it was. They both said maroon or burgundy. It looks, that year, if you were familiar with that body style, the Lincoln Continental and the Mercury looked almost identical. and they were both considered luxury cars. And a lot of the mobsters drove those kind of cars, plus Lincoln Continentals, Cadillacs, whatever, and Buicks. Jimmy Hoffa actually drove a 1974 dark green Pontiac Granville, and he left that at the north end of the parking lot at the Red Fox. And they found out the next morning that it was unlocked. There was a registered handgun in the front seat, and there was no sign of any, fuss that he had any struggle or anything. So when he left his car, everything was fine, casual. And when he got in the Mercury, everything was still casual. But I believe that since the car was starting to swerve just as it's exiting, the delivery truck driver and also my mom attest to the fact that it was swerving, tells me he was onto it by then. And whoever was in the front seat, between the time it swerved out and pulled up alongside my parents' car, the guy in the front seat had gone through that spacious opening between the front and back seat. And you can see how big that back seat is. They were holding something down on the floorboard, because my mom said both big men in the back seat had their knees jammed way up in their chest and their chin. And the guy closest to her on the driver's side in the back was holding a leash or a rope. And so she, in her mind, interpreted it, they're holding a dog down on the back seat, these two men. And they're fighting like mad. Must be a big dog. So she tells my dad, Ken, they're holding a dog down back there. He's in the back seat, and they've got a leash. And he says, quit looking. He says, that's the mafia. So the car, the Mercury, then kind of slows down and drops back a little bit in the next lane, then pulls right up back inside again, and they're driving the same pace, 2 feet away, staring at my mom and dad again. Chuck O'Brien's full front. This is not a profile picture. This is directly facing them. And the two men are still fighting like mad with something in the back seat, trying to keep it down. My mom said again, they're fighting. They're trying to keep a dog or something down back there. She didn't figure it. Nobody saw Hoffa. So this is all conjecture. I gotta just say that. So anyway, so this is a 5-mile trek from the time that they spotted the car on 15 Mile at Telegraph, till the time the car. My dad had slowed the car down. He was getting nervous now because twice this car was driving right next to him and staring at him. He didn't know why. And it's the mafia, so he's thinking back to when his car was wired when he was at Darby's, because he switched juice companies, and he doesn't know if that's why. But I'll show a picture of the car that he got from his boss, Sam Boeski. Anyway, so they get close to 10 Mile. My dad then figures he's going to slow down, let this car go ahead. It sped up a little bit, pulled in front of him in the 4th lane, and it cut across Telegraph. And there was a turnaround that actually coincided with the entrance to the Raleigh House, which he was actually hired to manage the year before. But he turned it down when the day before he was supposed to start. He'd been out of work for a year, but he heard that the Jewish mafia owned the restaurant. And because of this past run-in with the mob and the wiring of his car, he didn't want anything to do with it. So he decided to quit the job one day before he started, even though he had taken my mom there for lunch and was really, bragging basically that he could still do it at 61. 1974, he was 61. Showed off the big kitchen, the big meat bandsaws, the stainless steel meat counters, the blood drains in the floor, because it was a kosher style restaurant just like Darby's. And he was appointed a honorary rabbi by Sam Boeski at Darby's, so he could bless the food so they could serve it. He had a yarmulke he kept in his pocket, and because he was an honorary rabbi, we weren't Jewish, he could bless the food and deem it kosher and serve it to the kosher diners. And of course the meat had to be prepared a certain way to be kosher. So he described this when he turned the job down. Of course I was working nearby, and I heard him tell the story about this. 3 times the size they expanded the kitchen. There were 2 other restaurants there, the Piccadilly and the Lion's Den. I think it was Piccadilly was a disco, and the Lion's Den was like a deli. But the Raleigh House was a big restaurant, banquet hall and restaurant, and they catered to a lot of high-end people. My high school Oak Park High School prom was there. Um, Jimmy Hoffa's welcome home party was there on New Year's Eve in 1971. I believe Jimmy Hoffa Jr.'s wedding. No, I don't know. It might have been the Kingsley Inn, which I was married at the Kingsley Inn. That was on Woodward and Big Beaver, I think. But anyway, so the car pulls across. It goes through the driveway and pulls up behind the back southeast corner of the Raleigh house. And my dad attested that that was where the restaurant kitchen was located, that particular kitchen. And I found out later that the big 8x8, 20-foot long dumpster bin was located on the far end, the north end of the building. It was a long building, and it was scheduled for service every Friday. This was a Wednesday. So this car pulls up, 2/3 of the car is sticking out behind the southeast corner of the restaurant. And my mom and dad were now, they're both looking towards the restaurant. They see the Raleigh house. They see the car, it comes to a stop 2/3 of the way out. Within a few feet, they see a Detroit, turns out Central Sanitation garbage truck. Not the kind that totes a big bin, but a regular garbage truck, you know, that picks up barrels and whatever. The driver was sitting in the driver's seat. And they didn't know what was going on at the time. So they scratched their heads, said, I wonder why he was looking at us. They went on to my sister's house. They got there about 15, 20 minutes before 4. So that coincides with the time frame of the drive. At 5 o'clock, her husband, Helen's husband, came home and they went to camping at Lake Pinckney Recreation Center, which is a big complex out about an hour away towards Ann Arbor, Plymouth area. So they spend the night Wednesday night in a camper, Coleman camper, pull along, pop up. And anyway, I talked to my sister about it, but not until February of 2019, and we compared notes. And that's when she told me, on the camping trip, all they said was when they got there is that they were followed by the mafia. They didn't go into details or anything, and my sister just kind of sloughed it off. Oh, sure. They got to the camping site, spend Wednesday night there, then all day Thursday. Enjoy the lake. They had an 18-month-old, Dawn, her first of 5 kids. And then on Friday morning, they want to pack up and get home. They've had enough of everybody being together. So they're packing up, Helen's packing up the baby and the stuff into the camper, and she notices a paper folded on the picnic table, and my mom and dad are sitting there talking. And it was a little strange, their tone of voice, but she saw the paper, and then all she could make out was Hoffa missing. Hoffa is missing. It was kind of folded a little bit. And then she heard my dad say, well, what do you think we saw? And my mom said, I don't know, a big dog or something. He said, that was no dog. So that's all she heard. Again, she didn't connect the paper and them or anything, but over time, we both heard these stories. They came back Friday the 1st, about early afternoon, came home to the townhome. They walked into the townhome, and I'm there, I didn't go with them, and they turn on the news right away, almost expecting what it's about. And I'm listening, and they say, Hoffa is missing, last seen at the restaurant, the Marcus Red Fox. And right away my dad quips, like hell, we saw him at the Raleigh house. And my mom's on the edge of her chair, and I'm hearing the news, and no big deal. They got the name of the restaurant wrong is all. Maybe my parents got the name of the restaurant wrong. I didn't know. So I was paying attention, but they're talking about he was either kidnapped or decided to, take a trip unannounced, and missing person, basically. And that was a day after he was reported as a missing person to the Bloomfield Township Police. So it wasn't until August 1st that it hit the papers and the newscasters and the TV. They kind of bided their time on the 31st, that Thursday, and then reported, their missing person. And then they said, well, he didn't show up. That's not like him. So on the morning of the 31st, though, Louis Lintow was the one that Josephine had called the night that Hoffa disappeared. He didn't come home at 10 o'clock. She calls Louis Lintow. He was a close friend. He used to be an enemy, now he's a close friend at the airport service in Pontiac. And he says, no, he hasn't heard from him. But anyway, he pages him at the restaurant. He doesn't answer. That's the Red Fox. He pages him again. He still doesn't answer. So he calls Joseph Bain. Now, Joseph Bain was another union, big wig, but also friends with the Hoffas. Louis Lintow then goes to Josephine's the Hoffa cottage in Lake Orion right after these calls. He and Cynthia Green go, his business associate. And they stay overnight, kind of to console. Maybe he had other reasons to go. Maybe he wanted to be close to the conversation. I have no idea. I'll tell you why later. Then Joseph Bain comes the following day, and he stays for a week. And Joseph Bain and Lintow are wondering, scratching their, what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, whether it's real or they're just acting. It's not known. The following morning, around 8 o'clock, Chucky O'Brien used to be dropped off every morning because his car was left in West Memphis, Arkansas, and he would get rides from Marvin, he would get rides to the Red Fox every morning parking lot, and then he would catch a ride with Robert Holmes Jr., the son of Robert Holmes Sr. That's who he supposedly delivered this fish to on the 30th. So Robert Holmes Jr. Would take him then to local 299 in Detroit. Then he would catch another ride and be dropped off at the Red Fox at night. That was the usual, process, because he didn't have his own car. This day on the 30th, Chucky O'Brien was supposed to have gone to Toronto with Robert Holmes Sr. For a union meeting, but he claims he stayed behind because he was just in Detroit at this point to pack his things. Uncle Tony Giacalone and Uncle Frank Fitzsimmons were helping him pay his gambling debts, and he only made $45,000 a year in Detroit working as a union aide, assistant, steward, whatever. So Frank Fitzsimmons had arranged for him to have a union position in Florida, and he's going to be a pretty good manager of the union. I forget his position, but he goes from $45,000 a year that week to $850,000 a year in Miami. This is right immediately following Hoffa's disappearance. All his debts are paid by Frank Fitzsimmons and Tony Giacalone. Gets a new company car. He works in the union down in Florida. He disappeared about on Sunday after Hoffa was abducted, but he hung around. He saw Tony Giacalone several times during that time, twice on the day of the disappearance. And Tony Giacalone was staying with his son Joey Giacalone at his apartment in St. Clair Shores. And so it was kind of unusual that Chucky O'Brien and Uncle Tony would be hanging out together so often, but they did. I've got more in the book. I'm going to kind of stop with the story at this point, but all the mystery seems to be about the eyewitnesses, what Chucky O'Brien claims, and what I do in the book is I address every one of those claims with other facts that disprove quite a few, including that he went to Jack's car wash to have the fish fumes or fish blood cleaned out. I have got direct information from the owner of Jack's car wash that didn't happen and what really happened. So I'll go into all that later. This is getting kind of long. It's over 45 minutes. So I'm just going to encourage you, go to this facebook.com, JHIM-TG. Download this book. It's free. You can go to the site at Internet Archive. You can read through the book. Don't dig into it deeply. Just read through and get the gist of the story. And then to the left of this book on that site, the Internet Archive site, you'll see a magnifying glass where you can do a word search, a topic search, whatever search you want, and it'll find that place in the book where it'll address it. It's a really neat system. I'm giving the book away because, like I said, I'm not interested in making money off of a book. I want the story to be, made public. The people that I entrusted with this, I thought were sincere, and so for 2 years, I kind of dicked around with. I won't mention names at this point, but I dicked around with news reporters, investigative journalists, original reporters, bloggers, people that you would think, I believed, were sincere. Even Jack Goldsmith, Jackie O'Brien's stepson, this story was passed on to. And then the FBI. I have a feeling that when the agents went to see my mom in 2006, those agents were probably on the young side. They may not have even been born yet in 1975, because this was 2006. And people that do the interviews, I think, are pretty much young. If they weren't born, they were still pretty young when Hoffa was abducted. So I'm going to leave for now. Please like, share, and follow this site and the Facebook site. I'm going to be using the Facebook site to just post links and give updates on what I'm doing. In the meantime, thank you for joining me today. I'll let you go back to your own life and tune in if you're interested in this topic. You're not going to hear this information anybody else. I'm pretty much the mouthpiece for these two eyewitnesses. Thank you. God bless.
Well, no one told me about him, the way he lied. Well, no one told me about him, how people cry. Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. How would I know? Why should I care? There's no bother trying to find him. He's not there. Well, let me tell you about the way he looks, the way he acts, and the color of his hair. His voice is soft and good, his eyes are clear and bright, but he's not there.
Strike.